Good evening, everyone. Hi. Thank you so much for coming out on this glorious spring day. I know it's kind of hard to pry ourselves away from the garden and the yard and the hiking. But tonight you are in for a real treat with John Harnum being here with us. This is a great opportunity. And I just want to welcome you on behalf of the Juneau Symphony. If you enjoy this evening, we are, of course, always looking for support and financial assistance. We have a raffle going on now. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year, and lots of great prizes on those tickets. And if you can help us out with buying a ticket, that would be fantastic. We have a great concert coming up. June 3rd and 4th is our next main stage concert, Showdowns. It's a great pops concert. It'll even be your chance to come as a Trekkie or as someone from Lord of the Rings or any number of movies and showdowns. So if you want to come in costume, we're going to have some fun. If you know cosplay folks, just come join us. But lots going on with the Juneau Symphony. There's so much happening in town. We appreciate you taking time to come out this evening, and hope you enjoy this next hour together. I'm going to ask Ken to come up and introduce John.
Hi everybody, welcome. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, and I'm going to do this in reverse chronological order. One, to see if I really know what that means, and two, because it will bring it to a point of kind of singularity that I think will help endear the speaker to you before he even starts. So first off, Dr. Harnum has authored a number of books on music and music education. His first book and series of books were trumpet method books that have become quite popular. He's got 5 different trumpet method books that are out, and one of them, most of them are with his own publishing company. One of them is with Hal Leonard. So if 12 or 15 of you go out there and buy that book, he can get a pack of gum. Sick. It gets worse all the time for careers. And so he, in addition to the book Practice on Practice, he's written another book on practice, a book on music theory, and a book on jazz music theory. He completed his graduate work, master's and PhD at Northwestern in Chicago, and he left the Mat-Su Valley and his music teaching job at Colony High School in Palmer to go to Northwestern. And bringing it closer to home, I've known John since I was in middle school. He graduated from Sitka High School, class of 1985. And we played in band together and music festival together and honor groups here in the region and in the state together. So it's really great to have somebody from the region back home sharing with us his expertise and his research on how to improve. So please welcome Dr. John Harnum.
We're going to just jump right in. This is a long talk. It's not fair for anyone to sit longer than 25 minutes, so feel free to get up or even. And also, thank you for coming on such a nice evening. Being from Sitka, I know what that means. So when we think about practice, this is kind of what we all want. Right? And it is expensive, but you're paying with something other than money, right? And when we think about practice, this is another thing that we kind of, it's unpleasant, it's painful, right? And I'm hoping to talk you out of thinking of it as painful or difficult. So you'll be happy to know that there's just 3 rules to practice, and nobody So, but one of the, I mean, this is sort of jokey, but also not really. One of the reasons that nobody knows what they are is because we're all different. Practice is a vastly complex endeavor. We all have different goals, different skills. We're in a different spot developmentally, maybe. So what good practice is can change depending on who you are. And so as we go through this talk, really the person who is the expert at practice for you is you. So I'm hoping that the information that I'm going over is going to inform the way that you approach your own practice. I'm very much not going to be in a prescriptive mode, like do this, do that. There are some things that I think are absolutely essential, but generally I'm trying to make this as applicable to a wide audience as possible. So, and there'll be time for questions at the end if I cover something. I can't promise that I'll answer. So through the course of the talk, I want to talk about a few things. There's some points that I really would like to make explicit. One of them is natural talent or natural ability is an illusion. It's a very powerful illusion. It's very hard to see that because it's all around us in our culture, for everything from music to sports to anything a human being does. Oh, they're gifted, they're natural, they're, you know, we've all heard it. So it's a myth. The other thing is that psychology matters. You know, one of the things that we're going to go into is the psychology behind what makes you either approach or avoid a practice task. How you think about talent, that first question, has a huge impact on how and if you practice. So we're going to go into that too. Another thing is talking about balance. We know it's essential in many different forms. And we're going to get into the specifics of that for music practice. Let me give you a really blatant example, at least what I see is most of us, I grew up in the band orchestra program, so I was reading from a young age, from 6th grade, I believe. And almost all of my formal schooling was reading, it was on the page. And I did not learn how to play by ear until maybe I was 35 or so. So for me, that balance was very much out of balance. It was all reading, no playing by ear. And we're going to find some interesting research on what playing by ear can do too. The other thing is lead before you look. One of my own problems or challenges is that I want to understand something before I do it. That's one of the reasons I have a PhD. Is because I'm trying to understand things, and sometimes I would wait too long to do them because I feel like I don't understand them yet. And I know that's backwards, but I still do it. So I encourage you, like, don't wait to understand improvisation or reading music or anything really. You know, get messy and involved with it, and then you can start to maybe apply some of these ideas. But you know, it's like the theory comes after the practice, really, as far as I've discovered. So this is me a number of years ago, 6th grade, I think it was probably 1978 or so. And the woman that you can see behind the piano is Ginny Packer. She was a teacher in Sitka for many years and just a fantastic individual and teacher. One of my mentors, both as a student, and I was privileged to work with her too at College Program. And Ken can attest to her amazing ability as a teacher and a person. So this is me starting way back then, no idea about what I was doing. I still kind of feel that way. So I think a lot of us, especially those of us who have been around for a while, there's a period at which, at least for me, there was a period in which I kind of was thinking about quitting playing. I didn't, you know, I went through the whole school thing. What is that? 6 through 12, so there's 6 years, another 5, you know, 17 years of playing. And by the time I was done, there wasn't really any options for me, like large bands, wind ensemble. I kind of had given up. I had sort of lost my passion for it. And anybody else in that boat? Yeah. It's super common. I've never met anyone who said, "Boy, I'm sure glad I quit." It's always the other way around. And so after all of that, I was about ready to sort of give it up. And then I took a road trip, a 2-year road trip with my lovely wife. And on that road trip, I decided to bring my horn, and I vowed to just play with anybody who would let me play with it, which was very frightening for me because I was always reading off the page. You know, I knew my scales and stuff, but improvising and all of the rest was super frightening. We're going to talk about fear a little later too. And it completely changed my life, really. This picture on the left here is down in Mexico, in Baja. And I had this experience playing with this just bar band that was one of the most profound flow experiences that I've ever had. I thought I was having a stroke because I was literally kind of outside of myself. And we're going to talk about flow and practice and all that too. And it was such a profound experience that it completely revitalized my joy with playing and my desire to learn more and my willingness to not worry too much about looking like I don't know, which I definitely was there. So after that, I started playing more, and I was a little deeper into it, and I decided to go back to graduate school. And in graduate school is where I did the research on music practice. So I've gone through close to 400 published, peer-reviewed studies about practice, everything from music education to learning science, psychology, sports psychology, everything I could find about music practice, which was a good couple of years of solid reading, and some of it was very confusing. And I discovered, and it wasn't hard, that probably 99.9% of it was all about classical music practice, which makes sense, and there's nothing wrong with that, because there's some fascinating research, some of which we'll go over tonight. But I was kind of curious about what does practice look like to a blues musician, to a pop musician, to a hip hop person, to some sitar player? What does it look like to a West African djembe player? Is there a difference? Now, one of the reasons that so much of the research is done in classical music is because it comes from the academy, and researchers don't like to work too hard. So we like to study whoever is closest. And in the academy, you have, band, orchestra, choir, opera, in the case of Northwestern Rhode Island, it's a big opera school. So that's one of the reasons why that is a population that's studied so much. So I was curious about all of these other musicians and how they thought about it, what they did, they didn't do. So I called everybody I knew and a bunch of people I didn't know and asked them to talk to me about practice. So it was about a 2-hour interview, very specific questions, qualitative research if you care. So I did interview classical musicians because I wanted to confirm what the research was saying about how they approached it. Up here you see represented, Colin is a principal trumpet for the Hong Kong Philharmonic. Rex Martin plays with the CSO and all over the world. Ethan Bensdorf is, I think he's second or third trumpet at New York Philharmonic now. And Hans Janssen is a world-class cello teacher. And they were all gracious enough to talk to me about practice. I was also interested in jazz musicians. You may or may not recognize some of those names. Stefan Rembel is a fantastic gypsy jazz musician. He's done a bunch of two Woody Allen films. Bobby Broom, Chicago jazz musician, Avishai Cohen, the list goes on. Pop and folk musicians. Anybody here know Om Johari? She's a Juneau. Yeah? Yeah, she started up Hell's Bells. I think it was in Germany when she did that. The all-female AC/DC tribute. Yeah. Fantastic performer, you can kind of tell. Fletcher. Fletcher, yeah. And I also wanted to talk to non-Western musicians. Indian classical music has a long, long history of very complex music, very practiced. Same thing with West African djembe, and Sona Jobarto is one of the more interesting people that I interviewed too. She's the only female kora virtuoso. And in fact, 60 Minutes just did a profile on her a month or two ago. So all of these people talked to me at length about practice. And once I got all that data, this is kind of what I felt like. This is exactly what I felt like, actually. So much information and so varied and so different. I wasn't really sure what to do with it, which is actually a good thing when you're doing this kind of research. Trying to make sense of chaos is sort of the human condition, I think, but especially so if you're researching something. So all of these different directions, different approaches, different ideas. And for me, this is kind of what we want to know about practice. Like, how do you do it? Right? That makes sense. But what I was seeing, there's all this other stuff that seemed to have nothing to do with practice and yet affected it profoundly. So I like to think in metaphors because it helps me control the chaos. And to me, practice seemed very much like a pinwheel. You know, it spins around, the colors blur together, you can't really tell what's what. It's kind of fun to watch. And practice is like that. It's dynamic. It changes all the time. It changes depending on how fast the wind's blowing. You know, all of the metaphors you might think would go with the pinwheel. So if you stop the pinwheel, you can see things. You can see the structure of it. You can see, you know, where the boundaries are, the mechanisms that help to make it work. But it's not the thing, right? It's not the actual toy because it's not made to sit there like this. So what I'm doing is sort of artificial, shall we say. And in naming them, what any good reporter will ask. So we have this big picture of, at least my picture of what practice is, or what it could be. And so what we're gonna do tonight, and we're gonna go through these blades. So there's what practice is, maybe what it isn't, how people define it, kind of a little bit of the research on deliberate practice, which you may have heard about, Anders Ericsson. Also what it does to the brain, some really interesting things to the brain. We're gonna talk about why, which is motivation, which is super important. If you don't have the motivation to practice, you're not gonna do it. It's something that I struggle with all the time and have always struggled with, both with me and my students. And we'll get deeper into that. When is there's two aspects of when. One is development, so practice, as we all know. And in fact, I'm hoping that a lot of what I talk about tonight is gonna be, oh yeah, I know that. I hope, if I'm lucky, there'll be a couple nuggets that might be good to you. But hopefully a lot of this will be reminding you. So developmentally, what practice looks like for a young child is going to be very different than what it looks like for percussion. And there are some stages in between too. But also the obvious questions like how much, what time of day, how much is too much? Is that possible? Those are the things. The who part is, there's two parts to this, but we're only going to get to the one of the two. The two parts are you personally, like how you think about things, how you do things, but also teachers. So these are other people that can help us learn how to practice. I might touch on them. The other thing is where. So where do you do it? What is the context in which you're practicing, either as a child growing up or now? And that can have some important repercussions on the practice as well. And then, as you can tell from this, the biggest part of this is things to do, strategies to try, the difference between strategy and technique, that sort of thing. So, shall we? There's been a lot of talk lately about what Anders Ericsson has called deliberative practice. And the research record on practice is actually fairly small compared to other things and times. But Anders Ericsson talks about deliberate practice, and I promise you I will not make the cardinal sin of reading off of the slide. So feel free to read it. One of the things that I'd like to point out about this, and give you a moment to read it. So one of the things that I have some issues with is that it requires effort, yes, and is not inherently enjoyable. I've talked to many people who say that is absolutely not true. We'll talk about that in a bit. And the other is that practice improves performance. Well, good practice does. Bad practice does not. It actually can have the opposite effect. So keep that in mind, this idea of deliberate practice. Two of the musicians that I spoke with, who I've seen play multiple times live, that are fantastic, said literally, hence the quotation marks, I never practice. And so that got me thinking, like, what does that mean? How can that be? So clearly they have a different definition of what practice is because he was very good. So whatever it is that they're doing, I think that's practice. They're not calling it practice. So we'll talk more about them in the talk too. So this is one of the things that blew me in, that there's a difference in definition, which we're going to get to. One of the things, this is an odd question, right? So Xingyan Kuo was a researcher in the 20s who was looking into genetic behavior, the idea that we are programmed, pre-programmed to do something. And he was looking at chickens, baby chicks, because there's a distinctive way that they peck for food. And the thought was that it's genetic, they're just born with it. And so he coated these chicken eggs in Vaseline so he could see through them as they were developing. And what he noticed is that, here's a fun image for you. What he noticed is that as the heart was developing and started to beat, it was moving the head of the chicken in exactly the same way that it used to peck. And so to me, that was fascinating because, well, yes, it's genetic because the heart is beating, but the chick has practiced that behavior thousands of times before it even hatches, which kind of blurs the line. What does that mean? You know, is that genetic or is that practice? And one of the Indian classical musician, this is Prasad Upasani, he's a vocalist. He was talking about when he was a kid, his father was a singer too. And in the morning, he would wake up and sort of toddle in, his father would practice in the morning, and he would toddle in and sing some of his favorite songs with his dad. So the music was around him all the time. And there's a word for it, samskar, which means unconscious influence in practice. And, you know, we all know stories. Victor Wooten is one guy I've been looking at lately, bass player, of people who are kind of immersed in this musical culture from the beginning. And to me, that is a form of practice. It's not conscious or deliberate practice, but it definitely has an impact. One of the other musicians that I talked to, Rex Martin, the tuba player, both of his older brothers played tuba, and they're quite a bit older than him. So when he was in the womb, he was hearing tuba play. You know, did that have an impact? I don't know, but I'm guessing it did. We know that babies can hear. So, and other things like both Ethan Bensdorf and Colin Oldberg, they went to the Chicago Symphony all the time when they're little and got to meet Van Herse, the principal tuba player. So there is a kind of practice that is more about luck than anything. But the good news is that there are many other musicians that I talked to, and of course in the world, who didn't start until they were, 19, 20, whatever. So it's not essential for sure. But this is another form of practice, this unconscious influence. This is a little more information about how what we hear when we're little stays with us even if we're not using it. So what you're seeing here is 3 pictures of 3 different people. The brain on the far, your left, is French only speaking. The one in the middle was French with discontinued Chinese, so this is years later as adults. And yet the brain, when it hears Chinese, is still picking up on what it learned as a child. And then on the far right is both. So there's a lot of great evidence that what we hear as a child stays with us. And again, no big surprise, but that's what science is for, to take those things that we think might be true and test them. Someone needs to do that on music, I think, too. So it's not genes. It's not that you're born with it. It's a combination of genes and environments, epigenetic. So now, of course, everyone brings up, well, what about prodigies, right? And there are some instances where there's something going on in a brain that makes it have this amazing ability, which is a very, very tiny percentage. For most of us, natural talent, born with it, it's just not true. So our culture has this going throughout it. So Harry Potter, natural, gifted, in fact, literally from his mom. Hermione works really hard for it. So keep these 2 ways of thinking about talent or ability in your head, because we're going to come back to them again. So some of the things that practice does for your brain are pretty amazing. There was a fascinating study done with piano players who started around the age of 7 or earlier. And their corpus callosum, the spot in the middle that allows our two hemispheres to talk to each other, is significantly larger in piano players, those piano players, than in us normal people. Any piano players out there? Yeah. I promise we won't measure you tonight. There's another one with string players that was looking at the lobes of the brain that control the fingers. And they were much more developed, much larger, more white matter, all of these things than a normal person, which makes sense, right? And I'm building a case for what we're going to talk about here in minutes. So in the brain, there's billions of neurons, trillions of connections, and they grow just like anything. And you can see the growth rings here in this myelin sheath that's coating the axon. And it's an insulator that allows us to make the electrical impulse more, it insulates, so it works faster, works better. And it grows very slowly. So, musical superpowers. Nina Kraus is a researcher who's doing just fascinating work with looking at the brain and how it processes sound, specifically music, and what that does for people. She's interested in developmental things like helping kids who have speech difficulties or other speech difficulties, but she's using music as a way to get at that. So musicians are better at sound discrimination, which is obvious, right? Emotional meaning. Musicians can detect the emotion in a baby's cry better than normal people, whatever that means. Better at language learning. And better at verbal memory and attention. So keep this idea of nature and nurture in mind while we continue. So there's a few different kinds of practice where you grew up and what you live, and it's kind of unconscious practice, but also more deliberate stuff. So motivation, we're going to get a little bit into psychology. Hans Janssen was talking about when he was younger. This is one of the best questions that I would ask of people because it's fascinating to see what they thought about it. And he wanted to make his goals more specific. So he was talking about having a very, very specific goal, because when you know where you're going, it's easier to get there, right? You don't have to wander around. So goal theory and motivation is really interesting. So if you are kind of caught up in wanting to look like you're a good musician, let's take music for an example, and who isn't, of course, so let's acknowledge that. But if that is really important to you, you're going to be really motivated to master the material if you think that you have a high ability to do it. If you think you have not much ability or you're not so good, then you kind of adopt this helpless thing. I can't do it, it's impossible. You avoid it because it will reinforce this idea that you as a person are either not a good musician or are a good musician. Whereas if you're more about the task, if you're more like, for me, guitar is very much like this. It fascinates me as an instrument. It seems magical to me to be able to play it. So when you're all about the task and you don't really care as much about what it looks like or what your peers are thinking or anybody's thinking, you're much more motivated to do the task. You're much more likely to stick with it. Doing the task itself is its own reward. You don't need input from other people. You use deeper learning strategies. You're more playful with it. And when you fail, I didn't mention this in the other one. When you fail with an ego orientation toward your goals, if failure is a disaster because it reflects on you. It means that you are a failure. And here's the really profound thing: is it doesn't really matter. It's how you think about it that makes all the difference. And so when you're more motivated to do the task, if you fail, it's an opportunity to learn something. And this is one of the more powerful things about practice. When we have a musical goal and we think it's too hard and it's just not, I'm not gonna look good. We'll avoid it. I mean, I'm just as guilty as probably all of us. And that's the other thing too, like the world is messy. We are messy psychologically. We are not one thing or the other ever, or I'm not. I can't speak for you. But I have both of these. So if you have a musical goal and you're worried about how you look, you're going to avoid it because you don't want that. If your musical goal is just to do it or to try it, you're more motivated to approach it, to practice it. So keep these two modes in mind because we're going to come back to them again. I'm going to skip that because it's not working. To me, goals are very much like fractals. So a fractal is a shape that's built upon itself. It's a recurring shape. And this Sierpinski fractal is, I think, a good metaphor for goals. You have these ultimate goals that might be a lifetime in achieving or a decade, very long term. You have shorter ones, long-term goals, maybe, it all depends, we're all different, 5 years. Medium-term goals might be a couple of years, maybe getting to a college, or you've got a really tough concert coming up. Short-term goals might be, working on measures at 82 through 56 or 56 through 82, by next week. And so all of these add up to the longer term goals, but most of them are kind of hard to think about. It's easier, I think, both for myself and for my students to think of one practice session. And that is also built up of different goals. You have your immediate goal, if you're even doing this. You have your immediate goal, what do you want to accomplish in the practice session? You have a micro goal, which might be, say, a particular passage that you're trying to get better. Could be a measure, it could be 2 notes, it depends. And then you have a nano goal, which would be like one repetition of whatever it is you're trying to do. And to me, looking at my own practice from this small of a focus really helps to make those longer term goals feel more achievable. Because one of the things about the goals, and one of the things that Hans was saying is that, when you achieve a goal, it feels good, right? We like to feel good. When we feel good, we keep doing the thing that makes us feel good. And so the smaller you can make a goal, usually the more easily achieved it is. And the better you feel, and the more you tend to persist in doing the thing. If you think only about the long-term goals, that might be a year or even a few months to take to happen, it's much harder to get that satisfaction. So restricting your goals to something really small and achievable can do wonders for the long term. And Hans told this story. He had a cello student who was just this fantastic student, but she was a new mom. She had graduate studies, and she could not practice as much as she wanted to. So he worked with her, setting. I think she was playing any cellists in the audience? Yeah, I'm one. You familiar with these? The number 12, is that a hard one?
They're all hard.
I think she's working on number 12. I'm not familiar with it. So it's this fiendishly difficult cello etude. And he said, look, listen, practice for 1 minute a day. And she said, that's not going to work. There's no way. He said, that's what you've got. Do 1 minute a day. And so she did. And, it took her quite a while to learn it. But, over the course, I think it was an entire term, so 2 or 3 months, she played the etude. So having a little teeny tiny goal, if you leverage that over time, it really adds up. Actually, we're going to get to that later, so I won't get that. So the goals are really, really, really important. Ed Kleinhammer, another Chicago Symphony guy, said this, which I think is great. So one of the things that motivates me anyway to play is flow. And it's been talked about quite a bit over the last 10 years or so. 10 or 15 years. If you don't know about flow, it can be something super simple. You know, you just lose track of time. Could be unloading the dishwasher. But the way that it works is here we have on the x-axis the challenge, how difficult, so easy down here, difficult up top. I'm assuming you can all read that okay. And then over here we have low ability and high ability. So let's imagine that you're doing something that's really, really hard. And you are still a beginner. So you're gonna be like, you're gonna feel anxious, you're gonna worry about it, and finally you'll just give up. You're like, it's impossible. There's no way. Conversely, if it's something super easy and you have high ability, same thing, you're gonna be bored. But if the task perfectly meets where you're at, it can be this magical transforming experience. At least it was for me. Now, when I was doing this, I was still very new to improvising. I'm sure it sounded probably not that great. It was in a bar in Mexico playing, I don't know, it might have been an Eagles song, Hotel California or something like that. And the thing that I keep coming back to, because I'm a much better player now than I was, that was 20 years ago. 22. But it didn't matter how good I was. It was the experience that completely changed me. And so it doesn't have to be, you know, Beethoven's Ninth. It can just as well be a 3-chord song. You know, what is it? Johnny Cash said, "All you need is 3 chords and the truth." Right? And there's something about that flow experience that is what I seek. That is one of my goals. And I have not yet experienced it as deeply or as profoundly as I did back then, but you know, I still have. But it's a fantastic place to be. And it takes a little bit of work to get there, but it's relative. I mean, I have a daughter who's 6. She gets into a flow state with drumming. You know, it's amazing to watch. The older we get, I find, or at least the more trained we become, the harder it seems like that is to achieve. And I have some thoughts about why that we're going to get to. But so why motivation? So the win, there are 2 parts to win, the developmental part. And so beginners, when they practice, I wouldn't even call it practice. They spend time with their instruments. This is a term that Aaron McKeown used instead of practice. You know, they don't have goals. They don't care. Their goal is to play, to make sound. And usually the louder and more annoying, the better, right? If, you know, once they first start and are either reading music or beginning band or whatever, you know, it's still very unstructured. They might play through a song once or twice. You know, they don't stop to correct errors, mostly because they don't hear them. You know, we can't fix what we don't hear, right? Whereas with experts, you know, there are specific goals in mind. They have highly structured practice, usually, but not always. They use different strategies, one of which we're going to get to. They correct errors, difficult sections are tackled first, and they rarely run through the whole thing. They save that for a show. So both of these are forms of practice, but they're very different, which is one of the reasons I'm really reluctant to prescribe any kind of approach for people who know the best. So one of the ways to think about this is there's 4 stages of ability. This is something that Rex Martin taught me. And the first is unconscious incompetence. We have no idea how bad we are. It doesn't matter, right? You know, the primary goal at this stage, and I wish this happened throughout life for beginners. But the older we get, the more judgy we become, I think. But your primary goal as a beginner or as a young child is to just increase your awareness, like, you know, putting your fingers on the string. What kind of sounds can I make with this guitar? I really like hitting it with these keys. You know, not great for the guitar, but, you know, it's exploring. So some of the things that younger players can experiment with are the musical elements, all 7 or 8 of them, depending. You know, what is artistry, you know, playing with other people, just gross physical movement. So practice for I say beginners, I keep wanting to say children, probably because of that cute little picture. But for beginners, your goal is not to play a concert. Your goal is to just increase your awareness. What kind of sounds can you make? So this is the stage that most of us including myself, get stuck in. Conscious incompetence. You know what good is. You know you are not it, right? And it's difficult. And now looks like most of us were fortunate enough to grow up before the internet. And so for me, growing up in Sitka, this is kind of a double-edged sword. My mom made me practice 30 minutes a day. God bless her. Wasn't super happy about it many of the times, but living in a small community like that and being probably the only trumpet player that did that, it made me think I was pretty good. Now with the internet, or once I started listening to people like Clifford Brown and Von Herzen, it's very easy to feel incompetent in anything, let alone music. And especially now that we are inundated with all these amazing musicians that are in the world. So the goal and I think unless you're at the very highest of levels, it's very easy to feel this way. I could play a 2-hour gig of a bunch of jazz standards. I mean, if I had thought about that 20 years ago, I would be amazed. But now I know I'm not Clifford Brown. I don't sound like that. I'm okay. People clap sometimes. So it's really easy to fall into this trap. And when Rex was talking about this, he said, this is the one that gets most people and we get stuck in. So the goals are all of the above: explore the instrument, setting appropriate goals, and I think is really important to this stage because nobody wants to be stuck feeling incompetent all the time. At least I don't think so. I don't. So then it moves on to conscious competence. You know what it takes to do the thing you need to do, and you do it. Right? You're still exploring the instrument. You give yourself musical challenges. You're seeking a flow state, maybe. You're seeking greater expression. You're having more fun, but you know what you need to do in order to do the things that you want to do. And this is, I would say any professional musician is in this category. And many non-professionals too. I like to think that I'm usually in this category, but although I often fall back in here if I'm not careful. And I should, this is an awful picture. This is not necessarily a bad place to be. It's a bad place to be stuck in, I think. But knowing where you're failing is valuable. But just being stuck there and feeling incompetent, not so valuable. So the last stage involves a little bit of a story. So this is the Miles Davis Quartet. And this is a concert in 1964. And this is, I don't know if you know much about Miles, but this was the time when he was driving a Ferrari around New York City and had lots of money. And everybody else in his quartet did not. They were still young and hungry and they had no money. So they needed the money for this gig. And he announced to them at the set break that they were doing it for free. They didn't realize this. And there was a huge fight, screaming, yelling, awful fight. And they went out and did the second half of the show, and they were all furious at each other. And when Herbie Hancock walked up the stage, or maybe it was Tony Muppet, one of them this was awful. This is the worst we have ever played. And when you listen to the recording, it's amazing. I mean, you should check. I think there's an NPR story on this particular concert, but it is just so vibrant and energetic, and it's great. And that to me is a great example of unconscious competence. They are so good that they're just putting what they feel in the music. And even though they thought it was awful, it most definitely was not. So even if you don't like jazz, I would recommend it. I mean, who doesn't like jazz?
Yeah.
What am I saying? I'm not sure why that's there. So something that a lot of people ask me, and that I'm still curious about myself, is time. Like when and how much. And your concentration ability, earlier in the day is best because you're fresh. But just before you go to sleep is also good because you're consolidating as you sleep. We're going to get into that later too. But usually the maximum is about 2 hours. Now, every person that I've talked to in all the research is talking to seasoned professionals. And Rex Martin, one of the things that he says, I can do more in 20 minutes today than I could do in 2 hours, when I was young. And also in almost every famous musician's anyway, story that I've found, there's a period of time in which, like Charlie Parker, 12, 13 hours a day. Rex Martin, same thing, 10 hours a day. I can remember days when I was able to, 7 or 8 hours. And there's many different things. I'm not playing the whole time. I'm a trumpet player, which is it's an awesome trumpet. But generally, and most cognitive science confirms that 2 hours is about our max. After that, results may vary. So Stefan Rembel, I love this guy. He was so generous about his time. And he has this great French accent. He says, I asked him about what his day like is. Well, I wake up in the morning and I have a nice cup of coffee and then maybe some breakfast and meditate for an hour or 2. Then I practice for maybe 3 hours. Then I take a nap, and then later in the day, maybe I'll practice again, maybe half an hour, maybe 3. And then at night I go out and play. And it just sounds so great. And he's a very together guy. Now, I don't know about you, I have a 6-year-old. That's not possible for me. Even when it was possible for me, I don't know if I could sit through an hour of meditation. But to me, he's living music. Like it is, he eats, drinks, breathes, sleeps. It's all about the music. And not all of us are fortunate enough to be able to do this. I mean, Jimi Hendrix would sleep with his guitar. So when he woke up, he could play. Right? I stole this saying from Henry Kissinger. So to me, especially with a young child, guerrilla practice is really great. It's just a little bit here and there, wherever I can fit it in. I encourage, I often have students who week after week, I didn't play. Like when we start digging into, well, why not? Oh, it just takes too long. So we talk about doing this trick that Hans Jensen was talking about, just like 1 or 2 minutes. And removing all the barriers to you doing that. So for example, I'll keep my horn out visible in my room so that there's no impediment to picking it up and playing something. So just before you get up, or not just before you get up, actually, if you could practice during your dream, that'd be great. Just after you get up and just before you go to bed are really great times to do it, especially before bed. One of Hans Jensen's other students, so all of these cello players in his studio are just fantastic musicians and really, really good. But one of them was getting better way faster than everybody else. And so he was like, what are you doing to do this? And he's like, well, in the warm-up for a band, I just practice for a couple minutes. I just go through my stuff. And that was just that little bit was enough to give him enough of an edge over all the other people who were practicing, hours and hours a day. But that little bit helped him. And we also know that the more distributed your practice is throughout the day, the more times you have to recall the information to your short-term memory, the more it's embedded in your long-term. So instead of one big long practice session, splitting those up is way better for retention, memory, all those things. And if you have ever lived with a small child, I'm glad I didn't write this book before I had a child, because it would have been a very different book. I might not have been able to write it, in fact. So the next one is who. And the who that we're mainly going to talk about is you, or us, I guess. So a lot of this comes from Carol Dweck, who is a Stanford University psychology professor. And I'm hoping that you've heard about this before, because it's been made the rounds quite a bit. And this is the idea, we're back to this idea, this Harry Hermione thing. Intelligence is God-given or a gift, or it's work. And how you think about these things has a profound impact on a lot of things. So if you think it's fixed, if you think you're born with it, if you think you're born with it, it's a fixed orientation, we call it. And it usually results in an ego orientation. It's fixed, you are the thing, you are a good musician. And if you fail, it's a disaster, it's really traumatic. Whereas if you have more of a growth mindset, you know that you can get better. Then you have more of a mastery orientation. You know that, okay, I failed, that was awful, but what did I learn from that? And I know we all know this, but it's, for me anyway, this was an eye-opener. Because as I mentioned before, growing up as this little boy in Sitka, who was the trumpet player, I very much identified with that because it felt good, and getting out into the bigger world and learning that that's not the case, it was a blow. I think I recovered from it. Maybe I'm still talking about it, so maybe I am. But the mastery orientation, when it's more about the thing, it doesn't have to be music, it can be anything. Failing is a way to learn something. What is it? Fail forward, I think, is the new catchphrase. So this is important enough that I wanted to. Oh, you know what? I don't think we have sound.
Let's check this out. Harold and your colleagues wanted to look into the impacts that praise had on children's development. So what they did is they took over 400 fifth grade students from all across the nation, and they did a really simple yet interesting study. Here's how it went down. They gave all the kids a really, really easy nonverbal IQ test. There were 10 questions, and at the end of the test, they praised all the children in one of two ways. The first group was praised for their intelligence. So they said, wow, great job. You must be really smart at this. Now the second group was praised for their effort. So they said, wow, great job. You must have worked really, really hard at this. Now this is a really subtle difference, but the impact it had is incredible. So after praising the kids and getting them divided up into the two groups, they gave them all an option for their next test. The first option was, hey, this next test is going to be a little bit harder, but it's going to be a great opportunity to learn and grow. Now, the second option was, this next test will be similar to the first, and you will surely do well on it. Now, the interesting thing is, out of the group that was praised for their intelligence, 67% of them chose the easier option, while 92% of the kids who were praised for their effort chose the harder test. This is unbelievable to think about, how just the subtle difference in the way that they were praised had such an impact. Harold Dweck explains why this happened.
Child or adult hears, oh, you think I'm brilliant and talented. That's why you admire me. That's why you value me. I better not do anything that will disprove this evaluation. As a result, they enter a fixed mindset, they play it safe in the future, and they limit the growth of their talent. Whereas focusing on the strategies they use, the way they're stretching themselves and taking on hard tasks, the intense practice they're doing, those are the kinds of things that say to a child or an older athlete, it's about the process of growth. As a result, they don't feel, oh, if I make a mistake, you won't think I'm talented. They think, oh, if I don't take on hard things and stick to them, I'm not going to grow.
Next, Dweck and our colleagues gave all the kids a really, really difficult test. It was one that they would surely fail, but they wanted to look at how the different kids attacked this challenge. Dweck noticed that the group that was praised for effort worked harder, longer, and actually enjoyed this test more than the group that was praised for their intelligence. This group got really frustrated with this test and had a tendency to give up early. After this artificially induced failure round, all of the kids were given a third and final test. Now this test was the same level of difficulty as the first one, but check out the results. The group that was praised for their intelligence actually did worse on this test than the first one. Their average score actually dropped by 20%, while the group that was praised for their effort did significantly better, raising their average score by nearly 30%. This is a 50% difference in performance that was caused by a few subtle differences in the way that they were praised. This study shows how praise can either make or break a child's development. I mean, we all do it. We all want to be positive with the children we work with, so teachers, coaches, parents are always looking for ways to support their kids and tend to praise them quite a bit. So we need to look at research like this and realize praise is a good thing, and there's nothing wrong with being positive, but we need to be very careful about praising someone's intelligence or abilities and focus more on the process and the effort that they put forth. I think this is a pretty easy fix that will help us.
I'm gonna pause that. So, make sure spot here. So now we're talking about intelligence, but Brett Smith did a study on music students equating the talent versus work thing and found basically the same thing. So that's basically the same thing. I'm gonna jump forward a little bit because it's already 7. So basically, if you believe talent is set, you either have it or you don't, or the talent is grown, impacts how you approach things. So if you think talent is set, you kind of avoid challenges because if you fail, it means you're not talented. Whereas you tend to seek challenges if you fail, you might learn something. With a fixed mindset, you tend to give up easily. You know, why bother? It must not be talented. It's never going to work. Whereas if you know about the growth thing or you believe that, you're going to learn how to overcome whatever difficulty you might have. You know, effort is seen as bad if you're talented, if you think talent is a thing, because it's supposed to be easy. And then the opposite, you see effort as the key to being good if you have more growth mindset. You tend to ignore critique, you know, if something's wrong, you know, oh, I must not be talented. So it's easier to ignore. Whereas people who are more about the growth really desire that feedback. Like, how can I improve this? So, you know, with this fixed mindset, you tend to plateau or quit. And I think that might have been, at least for me, one of the reasons why I was considering quitting. Whereas being inspired by others, you're like, wow, that's cool. I really want to do that. So this poster is, you can get it for free. There's a link at the end of this talk. I like to put it up in my teaching studio so that it reminds me, but also my students. And the thing to remember is this. Right? So, you know, it's really nice to have this crisp, nice graphic, you know, that explains these two things, but I anyway am a messy mix of both of these, both of this fixed and growth mindset. I try to think more about it as a growth mindset, but you know, the reality is that they're both in there somewhere for me. Maybe it's the same for you. So it's more of a tool to get at what you're thinking about things and how that might affect how you practice. So what can you do? More about being, when you're in a situation where either something fails or something's going wrong or it seems hard, you know, just be aware of what you're feeling and what that might be connected to and whether or not it's true. And that to me is an interesting thing. It doesn't matter the truth of it, it's how you think about it that changes your approach to the practice. So I think I'm going to actually, well, I'll try to blast through this really fast. So one of the things I was talking about earlier was, you know, when you're the best person in the room, choose another room. Because when you're with a teacher or someone who's better than you, you operate at a higher level. You know, that brings you up, and it allows you to do things that maybe you couldn't even do by yourself. And it's something that we call scaffolding, and it's one of my favorite terms, zone of proximal development. You know, those academics that are languages. So it's this space that you're in where you get better because of who you're with. And over time, you know, you can take that away and become better than you were before, if that makes sense. One of the things, does anyone here know about mirror neurons? It's just cool. Yeah. So these researchers were studying chimps, and I don't remember exactly what they were looking at, but the chimps were all wired up. They were reading their brains for something or other. And one of the researchers that had taken a break, one of the researchers picked up a peanut and ate it. and heard this signal from this monkey's brain. And that started this whole process of figuring out what that signal was. And it turns out that we primates have a subset of neurons in our brain that when we see someone do something, it could be anything, the same subset of, or a subset of neurons that are required to do that task will fire in our own brains. And so that whole monkey see, monkey do, that's why we can do that. It's this mirror neuron system. So being in an environment where you're seeing people do whatever your instrument might be, or music in general, I think has a profound effect on your, maybe not your ability to do it, but your ability, but seeing that it's possible. I know when I go to see live music, I'm inspired in a way that a recording just does not do. And I wonder if mirror neurons are part of that. So that's a live music talk. So now to the how part. So what most of these great practicers that I talk to, they have this practice cycle. There's this forethought phase. They know what their goals are. They kind of have an idea of strategies, or they have a quiver of strategies that they can use, and they have a plan on how to achieve those goals. And it's this never ceasing cycle. And then they actually do the practice. And so all of the goals and motivations and the plans in place already, they start with the warm up. And one thing I think is not in here that I forgot to add is that someone like Ingrid Jensen, she will take whatever it is she's working on in her practice session. The entire practice session, including the warm up, is geared to make that thing happen. So I know for me as a trumpet player, I would do this particular warm-up. Sometimes I'd warm up for a half an hour, 40 minutes, and it had absolutely nothing to do with what I was going to actually practice. And while that's not necessarily bad, it's certainly not efficient. And I've since changed that so that everything in that short practice session, whether it's 15 minutes or a couple hours, everything is geared towards my goal, including the warm-up, including the techniques. Any scale practitioners out there? Yeah, me too. I have changed though. I will now only do the scales and the chords and all of that stuff that are associated with the tune that I'm doing. I won't go, well, sometimes I do, go through all 12, blah, blah, blah. To me, I don't have enough time for that anymore. And then the next section is doing the repertoire, actually working on the piece, solo excerpt, chord changes, whatever it might be. And very rarely is there a full run through. Now, Allison Miller here is a jazz drummer, and she, every now and then, we all get tired of at least I don't know about you, but I do, get tired of that kind of regimental practice. It's so much work that I like to just go play sometimes. And she says that she frequently will do that. She'll go into the practice room and just play and not worry about any of that other stuff. And I think that's important to remember too, because it's fun. And sometimes practice can be not so fun. So it's good to, if you're feeling that, to just play. So after that, there's this assessment period. And you can go formal and write it down or record yourself, journal it, whatever. But for me, it's just an informal check-in. How did it go? How do I feel about it? What worked? What didn't? What am I going to do next time? And then it starts over again. So the other thing that I found across genres, across all of the people that I have talked with, is this idea of creative engagement with the material. You're not blindly doing scales, da 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 da. It's all creatively engaged with. So like Ingrid was talking about, taking this whatever she's working on and changing keys or doing it in upper register or just messing around with the voice, playing it backwards, just being creative with the material. And I found that when you're creative with something, it sticks better. It's more fun too. Erin McKeown, she was one of the people who said, I never practiced. The way that she learned to play was basically by she had a 4-track recorder and just started writing songs and figured it out as she went. And so her process is very much creative. And it didn't feel at all like practice because it was so fun and engaging. which is, I think, what I hope for himself. Same thing with Ethan. He would invent exercises if he was struggling with some aspect of a performance coming up. He'll invent exercises to get better at whatever is causing trouble. And Nicholas Barron, he's another one who said, "I never practiced." He went down to the subways in Chicago and just played for 8 hours a day and put his hat out and paid the rent barely, and that's how he learned to play, by just doing it. Kind of more of a punk rock approach. So this creative engagement, straight to the problem, usually if you're having a problem, errors are fixed immediately, and this idea of strategy versus technique. So strategy is the thing that you're going to do. So for example, chaining and back chaining. So you probably know about chaining. If you have something that's difficult, you'll take the little first bit, the first 5 notes and play that. And then you'll play then these 5. And then you'll slowly work your way through the passage. Make sense? Probably most of us have done that. So another way to do that is to do back chaining, is to do that backwards. And with kids, I find this really effective because, especially when they're just running through the piece, and then they stall out halfway, and then they go back to the beginning. The beginning becomes really strong, and the end is awful, if they even make it. So if you can do the opposite of that, the end becomes stronger than the beginning because it gets the most repetitions. So that would be the strategy. The technique, so this is a clam graph. I'm very proud of this. Not scientific at all. But so this is the error of magnitude, like huge error up at the top, subtle error down at the bottom. And your ability to perceive. So you can't hear what you don't know is wrong, right? So if you're a beginner, unskilled, you're not going to hear any of these errors. So it won't matter to you whether you're making them because you don't hear them. Whereas if you're highly skilled, even the smallest of errors will show up on your radar. So part of, at least my job as a teacher, is to help students and myself hear better, if possible. The challenge. It's one of my favorite sayings. Julius Baker, you never make a mistake if you never make a mistake. And this relates to going slowly. Right? And this is one of the hardest things for me anyway, to do. It's one of those things that's simple but not easy, as opposed to simple and easy. So going slow enough that you don't make any errors whatsoever is really hard to do. But it's hard for me to do. But one of the reasons for this is that you're literally growing connections in your brain. And that just doesn't happen very quickly. So if you take the time to do the movements, whatever it might be, and do the sound as perfect as you can, as well as you can hear, and do it slowly, you will find that it's transforming and transformative in your ability to play without anxiety. This is a game changer for me anyway, and my students. It's really hard to do because we all want to play it now. We've all heard the recorded version. We all know how it's supposed to go, but playing slowly doesn't sound like.
Explain a little bit though about what's going on with the myelin sheath.
Sure. So the from earlier on, the myelin sheath is what is coats the neurons, the part that grows around it, to insulate it so it gives a better signal. So it becomes more clear what you're doing physically or mentally. So so that's the part that you're growing as you make these connections. So out here is the axon that's connecting out to other brain cells. And once it makes that connection, this myelin will start growing to give it make it more efficient.
Which is why if you make a mistake and you make it over and over again, the forms go wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, and so that mistake becomes really important because it's really hard to fix an error that has been practiced.
Yes.
Yeah, really hard. Harder than doing it slow in the first place. And yes. So I'm going to run through these quickly. So mental practice is a huge thing. It's so great, especially if you're a brass player and you physically can't play anymore. Chanting, clapping, singing, for sure. My trumpet teacher in college would say, if you can't sing it, you can't play it. And I totally agree. Counting, fingering it silently, isolating problem sections to practice mentally. You sit in your bed at night and do fingerings or whatever. The mental practice is so great. There's this cool study of trombone players. Can't even appreciate this. And what these graphs are, the tall graphs in the middle is the combined mental and physical practice. So actually practicing the instrument and then practicing it by moving it but not playing, and mentally practicing without doing anything. What I found fascinating about this is that this is the no practice group. They still got better, right? Have you ever had students who show up and like, I didn't practice this week, and yet all of a sudden they get better? Yeah, not a good long-term strategy. So some of the technology that I like to use for practice, one of the dangers of this is that, music is not about looking at things, it's about listening, right? And so this is not something that I've been struggling with probably for the first 30 years of my playing, is that, when we learn to tune, we're staring at a machine and adjusting our instrument based on what we see, not what we're hearing. Now, that being said, this app, I don't know, anybody have this app, Total Energy Tuner? It's a really great app. It's got so many features on it, I don't even know them all. In fact, when I was updating this talk, I found one that I didn't know about, which is this one on the far right, which is your practice performance. I don't know anything about it yet, but it looks cool. But, so what I've been doing is, with my students and myself, this is something that Ingrid Jensen turned me on, is playing with the drones. The drone can be a piano, just put the sustain pedal on. You can find them on YouTube. This is an app by Prasad Upasani, one of the guys who I interviewed on practice. And it's Indian classical drums. So it's using tampura and various other things. It's also got really cool toggle beats to it. So it's much more fun than a metronome, I think. But the thing about the drones is that you can actually feel what it is to play in tune. Instead of looking at a tuner, be like, oh yeah, I'm in tune. Okay, set it, forget it. You experience what it is to be in tune, which I never got as a high schooler. It's very difficult in a band setting where no one knows what they're doing to even understand what that means. Even though I had great directors all through college, listen to the tuba, tune to the tuba, okay. It's not the same. And also, about the third of the major chord has to be a little bit lower. I knew that intellectually, but it wasn't until I started playing with drones that the light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, it's true. So playing with drones is really valuable. Also, the metronome click is great because it's nice and clean, but playing with other beats is so much more fun, especially for scale work and stuff. These are two really good ones. This one on the left, I think, is Apple device only. Any guitar players in the crowd? Okay, that's too bad. I mean, it's great. You can't play guitar. This is a really cool app, Sound Slice. So since there are many, they might actually have some other string playing on there. I haven't looked at it. Anyway, looping, super fun. I'm just blessed with these. Any people out here learning by ear or transcribing? Great. Do you know about this app? It's fantastic. Something so. Yeah. You can chop it up in as many different pieces as you want. It'll incrementally speed it up for you. Fantastic app. And if you haven't been learning things by ear, I recommend it. Another great one is Ira Pro, does chord changes, any kind of song you might imagine. I don't think there's much of a classical repertoire in there, but if you haven't messed around with playing with a backing track of, blues tune or whatever, I highly recommend it. So a little bit on sleep and practice. During sleep, we consolidate what happened during the day. We get rid of stuff we don't need. Bob Duke has done some fantastic studies with that, the sleep's effect on music learning. So cleans out stuff you don't want. One thing that I had some technical difficulties earlier today, so I wasn't able to put this new study into this talk. There's this thing, so this is, imagine the lovely picture, right? So this study was done in 2019. They were looking at people who took 10-second rest when they practiced, and it was randomly done. Just every now and then, take 10 seconds and just sit and breathe. And they found that the people who did that got better significantly faster than those who didn't. And their brains were wired up with encephalograph, looking to see what was happening in the brain when they were resting. And it turns out that the brain is going over the things that you've just been doing about 10 to 12 times faster than normal speed as a process of learning. And when you take those 10 seconds, you get better more quickly than if you just keep practicing. I think we probably all had the experience, when you practice something over and over and over, and you start to get worse at it, and you just stop. You're like, okay. And then when you come back to it, it's better. What I've been trying to do with myself and my students is before it starts to get bad, take 10 seconds. After 4 or 5 great repetitions, just take a break. And it seems to work really, really well. It's amazing to me how powerful a simple thing like that. So this is one of the more useful things that I have found that Rex told me. And it was told him by Bud Hurst, Chicago principal, terms there for 55 years. To be careful about practicing, because we start to practice practicing. I know I'm guilty of this. And we need to practice performing, playing, like having that mindset when we're actually practicing. And I think that, well, that's good. Yeah, that's good. One of the, how many classical musicians in the crowd? One of our pieces of kryptonite is that the performances are rather scattered. We don't play every weekend, right? We don't perform every weekend. It's every couple months maybe. And it becomes this very special, rarefied thing. And so it's easier to practice practicing instead of practice performing, because performances don't happen that often. But I think this is good advice. And Nicholas Barron recommends just perform all the time, anywhere. Take your instrument out, whatever genre, and just go play on the street. It's a performance. Why not? Which I already talked about that, so. The other thing that I've noticed lacking in so many of my students is we'll be working on a song and I'll be like, did you listen to that? Oh, no. And it's like trying to understand the color blue without ever looking at the sky. It's really hard. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. But the listening part is so crucial to practice, because if you don't know what you're going for, The other thing that we often don't practice, we're so worried about technique that we don't think about intonation, which you talked about too, and tone. Some of us do, I'm sure. I do. Another thing is rhythm. I have such a hard time getting students to move, whether it's tapping a foot, anything. And they're playing okay, they're putting their fingers in the right place or whatever, but as soon as they start moving, it just locks right in. So rhythmic practice, playing a drum. But more than anything else, these are things that I find lacking in my own students. Hopefully they're not lacking in you. But the other is this going slow. It's so powerful. It's hard to do, but it's so good. So things to think about: balance, and what does that mean? So a seesaw, again, is supposed to be fun. This is just sitting there, which is no fun. But these are some things that I'm thinking about. Using your eyes, like with the tuner, instead of your ears. Reading versus learning by ear. So some of these things, maybe you're not doing. I know some of them I'm not doing. And I find that some of these things sort of frighten me a little bit. And to me, it kind of feels like this. Like, what the heck do I do? It can be a little bit scary and messy. How many improvisers are in the audience? Yeah. How many of you are scared of improvising? Yes. It's kind of like being scared to speak, like have a conversation with someone, not like speak up here, I'm scared by that. We don't think twice about having a conversation with someone. It's total improvisation. You kind of know the theme, and you just sort of banter back and forth. We improvise every day, but we are so trained, and me too, at least in school music, to play from the page. It has to be right. If you play a wrong note, that's no good. And it can be freezing, I think, was for me anyway, to not have any limits, really, and to be able to play anything. And also, when you play that, you're not playing Beethoven's stuff. You know, oh, that's not mine, I'm just gonna play. It's something that you're creating, which you can also do. But I think that's where the task is, whatever that fear might be. So, that was that. And there's more in the book, but generally, that's kind of my thoughts about practice. So, natural talent is an illusion, and be very aware of talent-based praise instead of effort. You know, take a look inside. Which one do you think? Are you more ego, more task? Probably both. I know I'm both. Creative engagement makes all the difference. Say you're practicing scales. Why start at the bottom every time? I mean, I've seen so many people pick up an instrument like, oh, play me something. Here comes the B flat major scale, you know, instead of the melody, you know, like, or making up your own melody scale. So, I mean, that creative engagement is so much more fun, and it's more musical too. This idea of balance. Take the opposite of the thing that you do well and see if you do that other thing well. And if not, you've got something to practice. Back to this idea of leaping before you look. You know, Stefan, when I talked to him, I think he thought that I was trying to get at some secret. Like, what do I do? And he's like, listen, you just have to do it. You know, you just have to figure it out. There's no magic trick. You know, you just have to do it. And so that's the advice that I would leave you with, is don't worry about trying to understand it. I don't know if it's understandable. But doing it, in the doing, you'll finally understand. There's a bunch of free stuff online. Those are the links. Take a picture or write it down. That poster I mentioned, some other things. Most of the chapters have a link to extra information. The video, interview. But yeah, that's it. That was a marathon, so. And if you need a book.
I was just going to say that. So we do have a few of his books at the Symphony office. They're also available on Amazon.
He's got a box.
He's got a box. We can help you afterwards out there as well. I guess we probably don't have time for questions and answers, but we have his email, and you can continue the conversation later, I'm sure. And if you have any other questions. I want to take a moment to thank the University of Alaska Southeast for partnering with us to make this space available to us, and we greatly appreciate that. I want to thank the board of directors. We have Charlene Steinman here tonight, and Susan Bell. I think she's gone out to the lobby to kind of help you if you need anything out there. Also, special thanks to the Player Relations and Development Committee. They were very, working really hard to find player development opportunities. And special thanks to Sharon Stein, who's here tonight, and Ken. The Juneau Symphony musicians and all of the music educators in Juneau, you're all doing great work and inspiring others to practice, and we hope that tonight has done that for you. And I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Oh, there's so many opportunities in town. I was talking with Sandy Fortier and Laura Haywood at Juneau Jazz and Classics. If you want to take advantage of they have master classes that are here at UAS, Monday night, May 8th. They do have tickets for that. You can either audit it for $10 or be one that is coached for an additional $15. And that's master classes in piano, cello, and clarinet. So Juneau Jazz and Classics is just around the corner. So please take advantage of that. This month, tonight and tomorrow is Bach Society. I hate to even say what's going on. There's always so much happening in town, but the jam program will probably have lots of year-end activities. Our Prelude Orchestra will be playing here in the library on May 19th. So that's our young students, 3rd grade through 7th or so. Anything else?
With Juneau String Ensembles.
With Juneau String Ensembles, and Mr. Shaw was just here, just had to leave, but Juneau String Ensembles is our guest to work together, and we'll see some more of those young musicians playing. Anybody else think of something that is right around the corner that I missed? Anyway, lots of great things happening in music in Juneau, and we're happy to be a part of that with Juneau Symphony. Thank you again for coming, John. Support us with buying a raffle ticket out there. We're happy to help you. We have a lot of musicians here selling tickets as well. So also be thinking about the next main stage concert at the Juneau Douglas High School, June 3rd and 4th for the full Juneau Symphony. Also tonight, I want to thank Christopher Cook, our music director is here. And everyone, thank you all for coming and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.